Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Harold Holzer, and I have the honor of serving as the Jonathan Fanton Director of the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all. And on behalf of Jennifer Rabb, President of Hunter College, let me tell you how thrilled we are that you've joined us and packed the house tonight. Before we start, I want to acknowledge two of our Board of Advisor board members who are here today, Richard Ravitch and Norton Garfinkel. Welcome especially to you. This is a very special evening. I know I say that about all our evenings, but there is something electric in the air tonight, in part because this event marks the launch of our special guest new book, which was published last week, Our Damaged Democracy. And in part, I think because there seems, and Bill Vandenhoevel, excuse me, our board member is here. I didn't look across the aisle. Bill, welcome. And because there is such urgency now, tragically, to the need to make government at all levels function again, doing the people's will and the people's business, as they did when our famous resident Franklin Roosevelt ran things, and indeed, as it did when our special guest boss, Lyndon Johnson, steered the ship of state. But I think I really know why the buzz is so palpable tonight. Anytime the home of the Roosevelts, or any home, can welcome one of the 20th century's great public servants, along with one of the 20th century's greatest broadcast journalists, we know that we are about to bear witness to conversation, indeed history, at the highest levels. Two giants are in the house, and I know you're as excited as I am to bear witness. So each of these men has registered an enormous list of past accomplishments in service to the public. They've asked me to maximize that list tonight, so I'm happy to do so. They've done so in long form, I should add. As a writer, that makes me very happy. They don't tweet or bot or post as often as they give us long form history and commentary that stands the test of time, truly. Jim Lehrer, who will lead the conversation, was in his storied career the absolute quintessence of journalistic objectivity. Whether hosting a presidential debate or anchoring a daily news show that millions of Americans relied on for fairness, comprehensiveness, and diligence. More than 40 years ago, it's hard to believe, he and Robert MacNeil launched the MacNeil-Lehrer Report, which ultimately morphed into the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour and then the PBS NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. Although he retired in 2011, his example lives on through his on-air successors, not just in style, but in substance. Among his many awards, Jim earned 2 Emmys, the Fred Friendly Achievement Award, a Peabody, and the National Humanities Medal. It almost goes without saying that he's enshrined in the Television Hall of Fame. I should think so. He was also a wise counsel and a hero of mine when I worked at public television, too. Jim will be turning the spotlight on Joseph A. Califano, Jr., the Brooklyn-born Harvard Law School graduate who went on to devote nearly 60 years not only to pursuing government service, but to ennobling it and to demanding the best of succeeding generations. He not only served in the Defense Department early in his storied career, he was Lyndon B. Johnson's chief domestic advisor and Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare under President Jimmy Carter. And remember, if it wasn't for Joe Califano, we might be setting aside a smoking section tonight. His other accomplishments include the regulations that created and enforced Title IX athletic rights for women, equal opportunity for people with disabilities, cherished here at Roosevelt House, and an end to official immigration discrimination against the LGBT community. In addition to that extraordinary record, he has written 14 books, including The Triumph and Tragedy of Lyndon Johnson and Inside, a public and private life. Along the way, he also enlivened a unforgettable conference here at Hunter College on the Johnson years a few years ago, sharing insights and analyses that really elevated the event. He also founded and chaired the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse at a college to be named later. No, it's Columbia. It's okay. We're allowed to say that. But as I mentioned, with equal time to Hunter, he also serves on our own board of advisors. So his brand new book is Our Damaged Democracy: We the People Must Act, a title that sounds not only like it was ripped from the headlines, but as if it could serve as the Bible for future action. So it is a great treat for me to invite all of you to join me in welcoming a journalist who made fairness fashionable and a man who helped make the great society great, Jim Lehrer and Joe Califano.
You know, I don't know how you feel about it, Joe, but as far as I'm concerned, we could just leave it at that.
I know it, yeah.
and go directly to the reception. Yeah, right. Thank you very much.
I wouldn't sell any books then.
I know that, yeah, right. Well, that would be the deal. You know, anyhow, look, to begin, literally, the way you began your book was with, I thought, a very unusual dedication. Let me read this. This is the dedication to Joe's book. For the women and men who gave their lives to public service in the nation's capital and in the states, cities, counties, and towns across America, through legislatures, executive offices, and courts, dedicated public servants devote their talent and energy to designing laws that serve all the people, executing those laws with competence and compassion, and adjudicating cases with justice and mercy. I have been privileged to work alongside thousands of them, and there is no one with whom I'd rather pass, execute, adjudicate, or debate about a law or program than a committed public servant. Joe, why did you feel moved to do that, to dedicate this book to public servants?
I really think, Jim, that they are the heroes of our society over many, many years. I didn't understand that. I began to grasp it when I was in the Navy, because I spent 3 years in the Navy and the Pentagon, and saw how hard these young officers worked, for our country. And then I saw so much of it working for McNamara, for Johnson, and for Carter. I mean, all those things that Harold said I did. There were people that were saying, here's a good idea. Here's something you ought to try. Here's something we ought to do. And without them, you can't be a good secretary of HEW. And I had 4 really brilliant people working for me at the White House. This is the backbone of the country. And today, and for quite a while, we've been diminishing them. We've been making them second-class citizens. We haven't really been paying attention to the fact that they are the cornerstone of what happens in these departments. The current president can decide, well, I won't fill posts, or the Senate can decide we won't clear anybody. The Democrats in the Senate said we'll block it, and the president. But, there is an army of people who really don't make much money who are keeping all the wheels going.
How did their roles get diminished? What happened? Why are they held in such low regard right now?
Well, it didn't start right now. I mean, you have to realize that. I mean, it started
slowly went down.
Yeah, I think a lot of things happened. Some, in one way or another, we were all, so we all have our fingerprints on some of these problems. But, the military took a terrific beating in the Vietnam War. It wasn't just Lyndon Johnson who took a beating. The military did, looked down on. I think that was a major factor. I think we have a terrific racial problem in the country, and when the federal government became really the army that was going to enforce the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act and other legislation, that became a problem. And I think, remember President Reagan in the beginning for sure wasn't that big a fan of public servants. And we now say, we got to cut them back, we got to cut this back, we got to move them out of their jobs. And I think we've seen it over, like so much that I write about in the book, it's been just happening over 50 years.
Now, the title of your book says it all, in a way. I mean, it's a damaged country. It's a damaged government. And lay out your thesis in general terms. What's the worst damage?
Okay,
right now?
well, I think the worst damage, in a sense, is in Washington. And the three branches of government have lost their constitutional bearings. The president has enormous power, much more power than most people realize. He's the nation's chief legislator. How do I say that? Because for every law that's passed, even without laws, there are 20 regulations issued for every law passed in this country, and hundreds and hundreds of executive orders by every president. And violating some of them can bring civil penalties and even criminal penalties. Secondly, since World War II, millions of Americans have been sent into combat. 1 million have been wounded, 100,000 have lost their lives. There's been no declaration of war. My hunch is that the vast majority of this country under 30 doesn't know that Congress, in the Constitution,
supposed to do that sort of thing. Yeah,
is supposed to do that exclusively.
Yeah, exactly.
And lastly, I guess I'll give you one other piece that worries me a lot. The White House staff, we were at 50 in the Eisenhower years, the Kennedy years, and the Johnson years. The White House staff is almost 2,000 today. Now you say, oh, all right, over 400 people on the National Security Council. How would you like to be an Assistant Secretary of State with that beating down on you? There's a communications department now. It kept growing and growing and growing. Exploded under Obama to over 400 people. I'm sure it's as large under Trump because you also have the tweets to follow. But think about this. There's White House. It's 24 hours a day. WhiteHouse.gov, the internet 24 hours a day, YouTube 24 hours a day, all promoting the president. The president. We have a state-run media. That's what you used to have in a monarchy or maybe in the Soviet Union.
What do you mean state-run?
I mean, the state is running this 24 hours a day. They're pumping out information, propaganda, if you will. This is a big operation. Imagine what you would have done at PBS with 400 people.
Oh, yeah.
And
We'd have been on 2 hours instead of 1.
I know. And the counsel's office. The counsel's office has become a real powerhouse. White House counsel, when I was there, well, I think under Kennedy it was Meyer Feldman and Ted Sorensen. I was there, it was Harry McPherson and Larry Temple. But think about it now. It's been growing all along the way. The largest probably was President Clinton for a variety of reasons, but even Obama's was large. And let me give you 2 examples of the White House staff. George Bush got the counsel for the White House.
Which one?
George W. Bush got the counsel for the White House to say, treating prisoners this way is okay. Couldn't get the Justice Department to do it. Yeah. Obama went to Eric Holder and said, do I have to, is Libya hostilities that I have to report to the Congress and get out within 60 days? And he said yes. And so he went to his White House counsel, and he said no. And Obama followed his White House counsel. And you have to realize what's happened. There's nothing Democratic or Republican about this. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The Congress is, I think, both crippled and cowardly. I mean, first of all, Capitol Hill is the only place in the world where war isn't war.
You know, that's what I was, explain, you do it in the book, explain how this evolved, how Congress kind of backed out of its responsibility to say, okay, we're going to go to war or not go to war.
Yeah, well, you know, we had, of course, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, and then
That's
whatever
for Vietnam, yeah.
Vietnam, we then have support of Iraq or not support of Iraq. So as one member after another faced re-election and got clobbered for voting in favor of these things, Congress kind of eased off and backed off, and basically they don't want. And if you look at the Senate procedures in connection with the Iranian deal that Obama made, I mean, the Senate, the Democrats particularly, but the whole Senate just pressled itself not to have to vote. No record votes on that whole arrangement. But they have other things.
In other words, Congress essentially just gave the power to the president.
Just gave it
Forget
to them.
it.
And the presidents just took it one after another.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no thought. And I have some examples in the book, but of, you know, presidents of both parties being really disdaining about the Congress even.
What drives the, other than, well, you've served many and you've observed them all in recent times, what has driven these individual presidents to keep grabbing more and more power? Is that just it? Is power the end result? Is that
I think power is part of it. They get frustrated because they propose a law and they can't get it through Congress, and it's, you know.
So figure a way around them then.
Yeah. And, you know, it's wonderful because you think about the fact that George H.W. Bush, I guess, said, you know, if you elect Clinton, you're going to, you know, it'll be. And then George W. Bush said, Clinton has done all these things to get around Congress. I won't do any of them. But he did all those things too. Whether it was an executive, signing statements. Presidents now, when they sign a law, they say, and Ronald Reagan, I think, was the first president to do this significantly. I'm signing the law and enacting it, but I'm not going to follow this provision. It was an environmental law. Then it was followed. Then every single president, Clinton, Obama, the Bushes, every one of them has done that repeatedly when signing laws. And nobody even notices anymore. Nobody even notices. And Congress does sit back. Partly they're consumed with raising money. I have in the book the excerpts from, you know, Democrats that notify new members of Congress. You have to expect to spend 4 hours a day on call time when you're in Washington. Call time is to walk across the street, because you can't raise money on federal property, to the Republican Club or the Democratic Club, and you call to raise money. If you want to have, you want to chair the Appropriations Committee or the Ways and Means Committee, depending on what committees there are, you have to raise more money for the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, whether you want to be a chairman or a ranking member. And it's significant. We're not talking about peanuts. We're talking about say
that again, Joe. Explain that, because I didn't realize until I read this. I didn't know this, and I read this in your book that a committee chairman, in order to accept the chairmanship, a responsibility to raise certain amount of money goes with it. I mean, and they specify the amount of money, right?
Yeah, party dues, both parties. And it's laid out in there. I have in an appendix from 2013. Every single Democrat in the Congress, it's a chart of how much they raised, how much their responsibility was, how much cash on hand. Republicans have the same thing. I couldn't get my hands on one, but not for lack of trying. And I had a very good research assistant. But it's a, you know, actually for the Appropriations Committee, it's $500,000 for a Democrat.
That's the biggest one, isn't it?
For the Democrats.
For the Democrats.
$800,000 for the Republicans. I mean, and the Ways and Means Committee, that's big, you know, taxes, banks, Medicare, the health industry. So what happens is then you become more responsive to the industries you're looking over in your committee than you do to the constituents that are back home. But, you know, that's one horrendous problem. Gerrymandering is a killer, and it's a killer in, you know, both parties. We now have before the Supreme Court a Republican case from Wisconsin and a Democratic case from Maryland. And, you know, you carve the district out so that your party will win, the candidate for your party. That forces the Republicans, since the most active people in the primaries tend to be on the edges, that forces the Republicans to go to the right, the Democrats to go to the left. They make all sorts of commitments. Then they come to Washington, and they won't compromise. They turn compromise into a four-letter word. I mean, this.
And you think money has done that, or gerrymandering? Or the
Why
combination?
gerrymandering and money? Money is another. There's this whole section on money in the book. I think it's the root of political evil in a variety of ways. There are the big bucks, but then if you're a billionaire, we have this single issue world now in which I don't care what you do about anything else, but I want you to be pro-choice. And if you do that, I'm going to give you a few $1 million. I want you to be pro-life, or I want you to be for gun control or against it. Or I want you to have exactly this position on the environment. Or I want you to be for legalizing marijuana or against it. And just, there's a whole section on single issues. And that further fractures the Congress. Because you get people in there that, you know, then after you get the money, then, you know, they want to get something for it.
They've been bought.
They've been bought.
To coin a phrase, yeah.
Absolutely. They've been bought.
Yeah.
And I think we have to deal with these things. Yeah. I mean, those are the other systemic things that are very troubling. The racial split in the parties is, we have a terrific race problem. The Democratic Party, at the Democratic Convention, 50% of the delegates were white, 25% were black, 15% were Latino. At the Republican Convention, 94% were white, less than 1% were black, about 5% were Latino. And in the voting in this country, a Democratic candidate cannot win election with less than 90% of the black vote for president. Hillary Clinton got 88% of the black vote, and she paid a fearful price for that. Obama really jacked up the black vote. Now, it was 64 when Lyndon Johnson got over 90% of the black vote with the Civil Rights Act behind him, and then the Democrats just hung on to it. But I worry about the danger in this country of having two parties that are so, you know, that they're so tied to one group.
Now, what is there, we'll get to this in a minute about how you feel some of these things can be solved, but specifically, how do you solve that problem? How do you just the one you just outlined, the racial division?
I think it's very tough, but I think I want Republicans to go out there after Democratic votes. I want more and more African Americans to become affluent enough. I mean, you're beginning to see a candidate here and there. I think that is a really tough problem. And, you know, Roosevelt, for whom the African Americans began moving deeply into the Democratic Party under Franklin Roosevelt. And then the clincher was the Civil Rights Act of '64, which just changed. You know, and the other piece of that is, incidentally, Kennedy did not get a majority of the white vote. Think about that. Lyndon Johnson is the last Democratic president to get a majority of the white vote. The Democrats have not had a majority of the white vote since 1964, and it's been slipping, and slipping. We're now running about 40%, but we slipped to 38%. You know, we have to recognize what's happening in this country, and it's not healthy.
Yeah. All right. Now, the other branch of government, the judiciary, you say it's damaged as well.
I
Explain
think the
that.
judiciary is damaged. I think in the last 10 years, there have been 50 Supreme Court decisions in which the 4 Republican justices have voted with the Republican, for the Republican position, and the 4 Democratic justices have voted for the Democratic position. And Anthony Kennedy has been the deciding vote. But it's not just, let me mention one other thing.
Sure.
The federal district courts, if you want to blow out Obama's immigration plan, you go to the Eastern District of Texas and you get a nationwide injunction. If you want to blow out Trump's plan, you go to San Francisco and you go to Bill Orrick, who some of you in this room may know. I know Bill Van, you go to Bill Orrick, big Democratic contributor and supporter, and he'll give you a nationwide injunction to blow out the Trump plan. But it's not just in that area. It's all over. We have an increasing amount of that. To see how one of the points I hope you read this book. One of the points is how incestuous these problems are, and the nominated Supreme Court justice is a classic example. The president looks for somebody that will take his position. We don't nominate. Period. We don't nominate people like Earl Warren anymore, where you don't know what they stand for, where they are, or Bill Brennan you can't be sure of, or Souter.
Souter was the big one, yeah.
Right. Souter, well,
Recently, yeah.
When one of the Bushes started thinking about nominating Gonzales, his chief counsel for the Supreme Court, we had this campaign of Gonzales is Spanish for Souter. But think about it. So the president thinks about, I got to get somebody that's going to support all my positions, my political positions. And he doesn't have to ask any questions anymore, because you only appoint appellate judges or just that have written tons of opinions, so you know exactly what they think. And then you send the nomination up. And then we have what I think is a sort of theater of the absurd in the Senate Judiciary Committee, where every senator knows all of that same stuff that the president knew. And we go through these questions, and, it's a very political thing where senators are saying, I stand for this, or I'm for that, or I don't want to put anybody on the court that's going to affect abortion rights, so I don't put anybody on the court that's going to continue to say that the Second Amendment is an individual right. And we go through this. They all know the position of the nominee there, and the issue is the nominee smart enough and are his feet thick enough to walk on these hot coals and get in? And what do we see? We've seen one, And what does everybody worry about? I mean, my God, Ruth Bader Ginsburg could probably have the greatest medical system in the world to keep her going as far as the Democrats are concerned. It used to be, you tried to get somebody. Now, a lot of people were burned. I mean, it was Earl Warren. Eisenhower said it was maybe his worst mistake was Earl Warren, because he hadn't have any idea. And a lot of politicians went on the court, and nobody knew how they were going to do it. Now, nobody goes on the court without knowing exactly where they're going to stand on these issues. So the battle becomes a political battle, and as a result, people regard the court, the approval rating, the regard that the American people, the respect of the American people for the Supreme Court has dropped precipitously from in the high 60s to about 40% over the last 10 years or so. I mean, this is,
Joe, you're going to have everybody in tears here tomorrow.
No, I don't. Look, I don't. I wrote it, let me tell you, please. I wrote this book because I believe deeply that if our people understand what the systemic problems are.
You really believe that people are get it now?
I'm trying to help. I don't think they do get it.
Yeah.
I don't think they realize, people think, oh, it's Trump. It's not Trump. That there are deeper problems. And I think if people understand them, they'll try. We've always, as a society, found a way to deal with things no matter how bad it seemed. And I think we will. I mean.
But how does that happen? Give me a scenario for for fixing the damage. A dream
Well-
can be a dream scenario.
Give a dream scenario is, the first thing is we have to get much better people in government, running for government. Why don't they run? They run because the primaries, I hate to use the term, but in a sense the primaries are rigged for the activists. And how many people in this room consistently vote in primaries? You know, primaries is where the action is. If you look at the presidential situation the last time around, people say, oh my God, what did we have? We had a woman who really was entitled and didn't make any major program. She got the nomination of the Democratic Party with 8% of registered Democrats. And we had this Republican who was an egomaniac. He got the Republican nomination with 7% of registered Republicans. And that's the presidential election. When you think about senators and congressmen, you're talking about 2 or 3% deciding who, in these primaries who's going to get the nomination. Our people have to get out. 2, I think we've got to reverse the Supreme Court decision in Citizen United. Money is not a First Amendment, doesn't have First Amendment, but I really believe that. Because if you want to run for office, Jim, and you say, well,
No, thank you.
okay, that's right. But what do you say? You used to say, I can do this for New York, or I can do this for Westport, or I can do this for my state, or in my town, or my congressional district. No, that's not what you say now. You say, how can I raise the money? Can I raise the money to do this?
That's the first question.
That's the first question.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, all right, raising money, and I say in the book, we all have, anyone that's been in Washington in this world in the last 50 years has fingerprints on this, for sure. I certainly have fingerprints on some of these problems. But I've raised enough political money to know how demeaning it is. It is demeaning to raise money for many people. It's tough. It's hard. And so
Demeaning and just to ask people for money.
well, and you know the big money now. We're talking, the big money. They want something.
Yeah, yeah.
This is
And they know that they're selling something, and they're selling their vote, is what they're doing.
Yeah,
right?
that's
Essentially.
right. I mean,
Yeah, that's the
that-
demeaning part. But
that's right.
yeah,
That's right. And so that's one thing. The other thing is, I mean, I think this is your world now.
Watch it.
The
Watch
world,
it.
the world of the media, not the
Yeah.
world, your media,
Yeah.
but the world of the media today. You have this incredible situation where you have social media can go after you. You don't know. It doesn't have to be true. May or may not be true.
could even be the Russians.
Could be the Russians,
Yep.
or who the next thing they may do is say, well, here's what this guy did in the back seat of his car when he was 16 years old. I mean, we're in this incredible. So we have that, and the social media is absolutely. There's no way, and when you think about the Russians, of going after somebody for telling a lie, or for suing them for libel, or doing anything like that. There's really no protection. And then you have the cable news, okay? You have Fox on the right, way on the right. You have MSNBC way on the left. You have CNN on the left. You have this world in which, I still watch PBS. I think that's about the last. PBS and National Public Radio are about the last objective news operations we have on the tube.
But they're not even perceived as that by the right wing. They're considered also to the left as well.
But all you have to do is watch the program.
Oh, sure, I know. But those people don't do that. They don't watch what they...
Well, that's the other thing. You don't have to. We now live in a country in which you don't have to watch anything that you don't agree with. I mean, you just go there every night and say, boy, that's great.
But Joe, whose responsibility is it to do something about all of this? I mean, if we're going to repair this, somebody's got to lead the
I think
reparation.
I think it's all of our responsibilities, as I said, as voters, to get much more involved. I think the other thing is, I think we've got to find much better leaders in this country. You know, in the Senate, in the House, we need, and I hope and pray we're going to have some really great leaders come along. I'm not going to try and identify them or not identify them, but if you look now, I know how hard it is. There's so much at stake because there's so much money and more. You know, forget about donations. In 2016, $3.2 billion was spent on lobbying. Okay, $3.2 billion. That's $6 million. $6 million for every member of Congress. I mean, we're really in an incredible world, and those are the people. These are the reported amounts. We have heavy duty problems like that. Money is a big factor, and we need somebody. You know, I would not have voted for Bernie Sanders. I voted for Hillary. But the book is rigorously nonpartisan. But his assault on that, and one things come along. You know, he came along and he said, "I'm going to get it over the internet. I'm going to get it from kids. I'm going to get it at $100 amount." Look how much money he raised.
So it can be done, you're saying?
Things can be done, yeah.
Yeah.
But we need people to do them, and we're going to see a situation. I mean, I don't know what. I'd like to make one other point. The Senate is not, you know, the constitutional founding fathers thought the Senate would be an institution where we'd have the longer view. But for 20 years now, the Senate has been on the margin. It's been either one party or the other. It's been 2 or 3 votes, 4 votes. And what that does to the Senate is turn it into the House. Because the day after the election, the minority leader is figuring out how he can get his hands in control of the Senate the next time, and the majority leader is figuring out how he can hang on to control. And that's unfortunate, because you don't find a lot of long-term thinking. We have no debates anymore. I mean, there's no Daniel Webster, there's no Everett Dirksen, there's no Hubert Humphrey. We don't have on the floor of the Senate what we used to have. I worry about it, but mostly we have to get good people in government, running for government, and taking government jobs. You know, if you're offered an assistant secretaryship at the State Department, I don't know as much as some people here do about it, but when you're looking at a National Security Council that's got 400 people on it, wouldn't you rather be one of the top 4 or 5 dogs on the National Security Council? Wouldn't you rather handle Latin America for the National Security Council than for the State Department? Of course. If you're in domestic policy, think about the Clinton health care bill was put together by 100 people on the White House staff. The Department of Health and Human Services had virtually nothing to do with it. So when those things happen, you say, how do you get a good cabinet officer? How do you get good assistant secretaries? And if you're an assistant attorney general, and the White House counsel's office is 40 or 50 people, wouldn't you rather be over there?
Yeah. Joe, there's some people in the, I would say, the current punditry class is tying a lot of these reality things, in other words, real things that have happened in our country recently, like the election of Donald Trump, the mass shootings, the Me Too movement on sexual harassment. A lot of these things are all coming together and arousing people to do things that they haven't done before, which is to organize, There are more women running for public office right now than ever have, and they're still being recruited, not just by Democrats but also by Republicans. There are more Latinos, more African Americans are running, all because these issues have come to have helped arouse interest. Do you think that this bad news can be turned into something?
Well, I
good?
think yes, and I think we have a lot of. I think we're going to have a pretty good crop, whichever side you're looking at. Better than we're starting to move to another generation. Yes, I do. I think these are all good, healthy things. I hope that when these things happen, the existing institutions can act on some of them. I think of these kids coming from. These are not people running for office, but it's along the lines. These kids coming from Parkland, Florida.
Yeah. They're going to have a march.
They're going to have a march, okay? Now, I hope that has an impact. I think it will. But I just, and this goes way back. When Robert Kennedy was assassinated, we had proposed gun control, Lyndon Johnson had, for 4 years. We couldn't get anywhere with it. Johnson said, we will get something out of this awful event. He said, we've got 10 days to get
10
this.
days?
10 days. We had a bill that, aside from, there were no limits at that point. Only 18, you had to be 18 to buy a gun. You couldn't get the $10 specials. And there was one other thing. But we also had registration of every gun and licensing of every gun owner.
Nationally?
Nationally. Okay, like a driver's license.
Yeah.
That was it. 4 times. Johnson said, we have 10 days to get this out of Congress. And Senator Tidings, well-meaning,
From Maryland, yeah.
from Maryland, thought he had a different kind of bill that might work a little better. And the president said, you have got to convince him.
You have to. You, Joe
Joe Califano, and get Larry O'Brien, which I did, and we went to convince him. Just back off. Let us get this bill out of committee. But no, he didn't do it. And we ended up, we lost. We got the first 3 things. But we didn't get registration of guns and licensing of gun owners. To propose that today, it would be laughed at. I have to tell you, when I look at all the proposals, we're going to have a little better background check. We're going to be a little more careful about it. We're going to provide, you get an authorization, then you got to get an appropriation. This is not a battle where you get one vote. I want these kids to get some kind of a law. I hope they do. But it's, while we applaud them, there's another army, smaller, but it's a lot richer, working to make this different than they want.
So I'm going to, I'm not a pundit, but I'm going to say something punditry here. So, in other words, I'm reading into what you've just said a little bit of glimpse of optimism that this can be done.
That the guns?
Yes.
Yes, I believe something.
Well, not only guns, but fix this.
Oh yes, I do. Look, Jim, I do believe. I wouldn't have written the book if I thought we couldn't deal with it. The point of the book was to say, look, maybe a lot of American people don't understand.
Yeah.
Some of the things that are built into these systems now, and have to go after them. Yes, I think. I mean, I even know that the Supreme Court does respond to publicity.
Yeah.
I mean, look, Obama brilliantly put John Roberts in a position where he had to get that. He had to bless Obamacare. I thought the president mounted a brilliant campaign, and the Supreme Court responded. Yeah. I mean, that's happened throughout its history. And I think, the people can say something. This is a mess. Vote some of these guys out. what I'd love the media to do is really get into the money issue.
Yeah.
Really get into it. You know, I have nothing against billionaires. I'll never be one. I know that, but I do think for somebody to have so much money and decide what they want to do and decide, well, I care about this issue and I'm going to put it on the line for you. I mean, just think for a moment. It was 12 years ago when Newt Gingrich was trying to hang on in Atlanta,
Yeah.
and Sheldon Adelson came in with $5 million to get him through that. That's happening every day in these presidential contests. Have no illusions about that. That is happening. Now, you know, and what Marco Rubio has been quite quote him a couple of times, but you know, he says, you know, there's a billionaires primary. There's a billionaires primary in both parties. And that's going on now. Right now, people that want to run for president are trying to get their hands on big money. There's no question about that. So
It has more to do with that than it does with what they would do if they were elected president, right?
that's correct.
Joe. We have a few minutes for some questions from the audience, and anybody wants to.
You know,
There's back there in the back.
You're talking about the money that's prevalent in politics, but some of this single action money is devoted for causes such as, you know, removing gun violence. So how do you reconcile that approach for these one issue favorable situations as opposed to that as buying something that's supporting, you know, gun rights or whatever the case may be?
my problem with the single issues money is that we should elect candidates based on what they stand for. I mean, senators, you know, what are you like as a senator? You know, what are you going to be? You're going to face a host of issues. You're going to have to vote on defense issues. You may sit on the judiciary. You're going to have to do a lot of things. Don't say the only reason I would vote for you is if you do this. That's my point. Not that money spent on all kinds of causes. I mean, you know, I'm not just saying Republicans are spending money. I mean, Democrats, George Soros is spending a lot of money. And it's not just at the top, incidentally. It's also, what is the DA going to be like in enforcing the marijuana laws? Or what is the DA going to be like in terms of the criminal justice system? There are all kinds. I think we really should, sure, people are going to give, you know, you give to the Democrats, or you give to the Republicans, or you give to this congressional candidate or the challenger. I understand all that, but not start measuring people, the big money, measuring people by one issue. I think that's a problem. And it fragments the Congress, and which in turn fragments the country.
Another question? Right here?
That's I hit my microphone.
Hi. For the past 15 years or so, it has occurred to me that one political party believes in government as a force for positive administration, doing good for the public, for the country. The other political party appears not to believe in that, to have a different view of what government is for, and is more interested in holding power. I'm interested in whether you agree with that, and if you do agree with that, how can we, the people, change, or how then can we put into effect the remedies that you propose?
I think it's not simply the political parties. I think if you looked at somebody like George W. Bush and what he did domestically in a variety of areas, you realize that he saw a lot of government as a force for good. we may have a very sharp division now, right now, where you have in office an administration that may not see that. But I do think that I hope both parties would understand that. I really learned how important, I knew government was important, but I really learned how important it was when I worked for Johnson. I was inspired by Kennedy to go to Washington. Actually supported, I worked for Bill Vandenheuvel. He never paid me. I went around the Upper East Side on a station wagon saying, "Vote for Vandenheuvel." And I did in 1960, and Kennedy got me down there. But I really got to understand what you could do and the importance of that. And it wasn't the handout, it was the hand up. You know, most of these people, you talk about giving someone an education or some health care or a place to live. These are things that most of us get from our parents and got from our parents. These are not big, major things. So I think I do understand what you're saying. And I note in the book that by saying, you know, because I've done a couple of events. I really shouldn't. Harold wanted me to just start here. But you know, well, you were part of the Great Society, and you were one of the architects, and you poured this stuff out and gave all these programs to the executive branch. Yeah, but we need a Congress. We need an executive branch that is, as you say, sensitive to using them. And we also need a Congress. We need a Congress that sees whether people are executing laws. Over, I think it's 24 years, we've had one Congress that has done an appropriation bill by department, looking at each department, continuing resolutions, one humongous several thousand-word bill that we all read about all the hidden stuff in it in the Times and the Washington Post for the next month as reporters try and find it. We need. I really believe that there are, you know, I think both Bushes actually in different ways cared about people and made that clear on various things. But I think even, let me just use healthcare as an example and close this off, of money, okay? In the Johnson years, when we proposed Medicare and Medicaid, the AMA was very powerful, financially powerful and powerful, and so were the hospitals. We didn't propose to give doctors their usual customary and ordinary fees under Medicare, which gave doctors the right to set their own fee. We did that to get the bill out of the House. To get it out of the Senate Finance Committee, we gave hospitals cost-plus reimbursement. Okay? Why? The insurance companies had refused to do that for years, so they got it under Medicare. When the next proposal, when George W. Bush proposed that we close the so-called donut hole and provide coverage of pharmaceuticals for senior citizens, what happened? George W. Bush had to give the pharmaceutical companies the ability not to compete, the power not to, no competition for their pills under Medicare. And we got the donut hole closed. When Obama wanted to pass Obamacare, the key to that was the insurance companies. He said to the health insurance companies, we will provide appropriations to fund you so you don't lose money. Without the insurance companies, he couldn't have gotten Obamacare. So you have three examples, and we say, oh, the healthcare system's a mess and we all have problems, and, you know, yeah, sure. But we have to recognize that these forces are very powerful and they need to be exposed. But one more?
One more question. Right here? Yes, ma'am.
All the things you've been talking about, what effect do you think this has had on the party system itself? Are the parties
Well-
finished, or are they going to split up?
No, I don't think the parties are finished, but I think both parties are clearly fragmented today. I do think, I think the parties will not, David Broder wrote a book, my God, when Jim Lehrer and I were little kids in Washington. Remember The Party's Over?
Oh, yeah, sure do.
He wrote
Yeah,
a book
Yeah, great book.
30 years ago saying the parties are finished. I think they're fragmented. There's no question about that. And, there's a sharp right in the Republican Party and a sharp left in the Democratic Party and a lot of people. There's always been some of that. That's another reason why your presidential vote is so important. Because if you go back and look at whether you agree or not, the ability to pass all that legislation in the Johnson years was because we had Republicans and Democrats. We didn't have any Southern Democrats. They weren't with us. But I do worry deeply about the racial thing. The cutting edge is in the South. We have 8 or 9 Democrats in the House from the South, all black. We have about 22 Republicans in the House from the South, all white. I think that's a real problem, and I think we have to face up to it. I want the Republicans to go after those votes. Why not? They want to win. And if you have the two parties with some group they're committed to, like the Republicans, maybe committed to a more affluent group of Americans, and the Democrats having these identity issues, can't give anything. Can't give anything that would hurt African Americans. Republicans say, well, we can't give anything that'll hurt these, our carried interest friends. I hope there aren't. There may be some in this room, but I mean, I think these are real issues. I think the parties will stay, but I think they're going to change. And I think the internet's going to change them dramatically over time.
Joe, in closing, would you not agree that the number one thing that everybody in this room and in this country could do to help resolve our problems is to buy a copy of a book called Our Damaged Democracy by Joseph Califano?
I want to thank Jim Lehrer, who I called a couple of months ago or a month or so ago and said, would you come up here? And I said to him when I saw him, I said, Jim, I've been having a drink years in Washington. For 20 years in Washington, I had a drink with you every night as I watched the news. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Thank you all very much.